Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another amazing British business podcast interview and talk. And today we've got the wonderful Keith Budden from Insurity, and I'd like to welcome you to Mayfair, into our offices, and we can't wait to hear about everything to do with you and your business. Would you be able to give us a flavour and tell us how you got into what it is that you do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem at all. I mean, I've been in business now for 25 years, but the first 18 years of that were really just IT contracting, so just going from one place to another, effectively an employee, but it was my business, you know. Okay. I mean, it's way IT is done. And I did all things IT security related, but then in 2015, at a networking meeting, I met a business coach, and I was quite frank with her. I said, in my opinion, business coaches were a waste of money. And she said, well, why don't you try me for 3 months? If I don't improve your business, don't pay me anything. So I was like, okay.
Wow, that's very good.
Give it a go. So anyway, we did that, and first few weeks, to be honest, just reinforced my feeling about business coaches, that all they really did was mirror about what you were saying to yourself. And so it was like, you know, But then, after she gathered enough information, she said, excuse me, she said, what I think you need to do is, rather than being all things to all men, is find a niche and own the niche. And at the time, GDPR was just being talked about and things, and I looked at it and I thought, you know...
GDPR, what is GDPR?
GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation, and it's basically how everyone has to handle personal data. Okay. Or personally identifiable data. So that was just coming out, it was just being talked about, and I thought every business is going to need that. There's going to be a niche there. So I took a year out from the business, from earning money, and actually just swatted up on GDPR, and everything I could find about GDPR, I was there. You know, if there was a conference, I was there. If there was a book, I was there. It was like, and learned a lot about it, and reinforced what I thought. And 2017, early part of 2018 was fantastic. Before it just, 18 months before it came in, brilliant. Beating clients off with a stick. You know, it was so busy. Then it came in, and then it was like the millennium bug. It just went.
So when you say it came in, you mean the government legislation?
Government legislation came in, sorry, yeah, on 25th of May 2018.
Okay.
And by August that year, it had died. Yeah, interest in it had died, because people were like, oh, it's another millennium bug. You know, it was hyped up and nothing's actually happened. And that was partly the Information Commissioner's fault. They weren't as proactive, I think, as they could have been. And part of me thought, oh, God, have I just made the biggest mistake of my life? You know, that I've dropped out of the market I used to be in, where I was quite comfortable. Okay, I've done really well the last 18 months, but now it's flat. But I'm glad I stuck with it, because now it's brilliant. It's fantastic. It's incredibly busy. And I think part of the reason it's incredibly busy is because now people are getting fined. And because people are getting fined, then it concentrates the mind of other people that they should be doing it right. And so, as I say, she said join the niche, and now I'm in a situation where, you know, I've got 150 clients, from small SMEs right up to 2 companies in the FTSE Top 100. Vertical was everything from a steel foundry at one end to Blackburn Rovers Football Club at the other, so as broad as it goes. I've written a book, GDPR Made Simple, which is on Amazon and all good bookshops. And I produce and present GDPR Weekly Show, the #1 GDPR podcast worldwide. So I think I own the niche. You know, some would dispute that, but I think I own the niche.
And when you talk about the fines, so I'm guessing that companies can be fined for breaches of GDPR. Yeah. Is that then what drives the majority of people to come to talk to you?
I believe it probably is, yeah. And again, I mean, that's part of the reason I do the podcast, is to publicise what's happening out there in the big wide world.
Okay.
So that people think, oh, actually, we do need to pay attention. And I mean, I'll give you, for example, there was a company in the Midlands recently. They had everything in place for GDPR, except they didn't have a document retention policy. They didn't have a document that said how long they kept all their data. They got fined £10,000 just because they didn't have that policy. Now, that was like a wake-up call to people of like, sort of, oh, wait a minute. If we get you in and you cost us a couple of thousand, actually, you know what, that's a good investment. That's not a cost, that's actually a saving for...
That's just at that time.
That's just that one thing, yeah. I mean, take another example. There is a company in Spain who got fined almost €500,000 for just really quite a simple breach of GDPR. Because I think when people talk about breaches, everybody thinks about data breaches. They think about someone hacking your computer. Yeah, I mean, that's what catches the headlines,
sure.
Right? Actually, you know what? That's incredibly rare. You probably might stand more chance of being run over by a bus in London than you do of having someone hack into your data. But it's all the other things. You know, if I send an email with personal details in it and I send it to the wrong person, that's a data breach.
Okay.
If I send an email with people external to my organisation's email addresses in the CC field of the email, that's a data breach. Yeah, so there's all these little things that people don't even think about that are breaches, and they're the ones that attract the fines. Okay, it might not be a big fine, it might not be £500,000, but it might be £1,000. And hey, in today's environment, most businesses don't even want to fine her £1,000 yet, wow. Because you know. And it's also, I think, the other thing which I always say to people is almost in the world of GDPR, forget about the fines, think about your reputation.
Yes. Because
the reputational damage can be huge. Yeah, you know, you can pay the fine and that's gone, and that's, you know, okay, an unfortunate bump, but you've done it. The reputational damage can last for years. Yes. Yeah, and you know, and so it's about concentrating on getting it right. And one of my mantras that I work to is that GDPR done right is a mindset, not a rule set.
Okay.
You know, if you can get all your employees just in the right mindset. And I mean, everyone who works in the company needs to know a little about it. They don't need to know everything. Sure. The ones who deal with data every day need to know everything, but those on the other don't. And I'll give you an example there. One of my clients is a warehousing company, and I went there recently to see them. Pulled up in the car park, got out of the car, and there's this chap reversing a forklift with a load of pallets on it, and he went, "Can I help you, mate?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm here to see someone about GDPR." And he instantly said, "You need to go in there, up there, first floor, first office on the left, and talk to Gary." Yeah. Now, for me, that's fantastic. Yeah, that he just knew. Okay, that was probably all we knew about GDPR was, you know, he's always got the message through the company. Anyone comes to us, you send them to Gary. Yeah. Great. Yeah. If I was an ICO auditor going into there, you know, someone from the authority going in to audit that, I'd be like, yeah, big tick in the right box there.
Because they knew.
Because you put the alternative, which I have had. You walk into an office and you talk to a receptionist, say, "I'm here to talk to somebody about GDPR," and the response is, "What's GDPR?" Then you know instantly that there's, you know, potentially there's an issue there.
Can we just reverse a second to
Sure.
talk about the ICO?
Yeah.
And who are they and why are they important?
Okay, they're the government quango which have the responsibility for enforcing GDPR in the UK.
Okay, so they're important in this.
They're important. They're a government body, but they're not a government body. If you know what I mean, they're sort of arm's length.
Yes.
But they get something like 80-90% of their revenue from registration fees and fines and all of that, and about 10% from the Treasury in a general.
I was reading this weekend about knowing that I was seeing you today, and I found a statistic about the ICO registration membership. Because everybody has to be a member or register with the ICO if they're handling data.
Yeah.
And the statistic that I found was that only 9.2% of businesses register with the ICO. And I found that staggering. Is that a correct piece of information?
No, that's a slight underestimate, but it is only an underestimate by a slight bit, because the actual figure is reckoned to be now somewhere around 22%.
Okay, so it's going up.
But even so, it's still
low.
It still means that 3/4 of businesses who should be registered aren't.
And to understand this, because our listeners and viewers out there will be from all walks of life, from sole trader, from partnerships, from limited liability partnerships, limited companies. This is everybody, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Whether you're Joe Bloggs working from your kitchen table, or you know you're here in an office in Mayfair, it applies to you. It's no different. It doesn't discriminate. And I think now, especially that it's been in 4 years, it's particularly true to say the old adage that ignorance is no defence in law. Yeah. So just you say I didn't know.
Sure.
It isn't the thing. One thing I would say to your listeners and viewers is that if you're not registered and you receive a letter from the ICO saying they know you're not registered and they give you a website address to go to register, do it. Because if you do that and you're an average sized company, that's going to cost you somewhere between £40 and £60 a year to register. If you don't register, the next thing you'll be getting through the post is a letter with a fine of £400.
Okay.
So, don't ignore that letter. Don't think, actually, they're saying I'm not registered. Yeah, no, I'm not registered. So don't deal with that. Because the other thing, of course, that you're doing, and we know that all government departments do this, I think, you're then getting on the bad boys list.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you're one who is going to be pulled out for an audit because, hey, they haven't even bothered to register. So, let's go and look at them. And I think that brings me on to in a way, to where we are at the moment, because those people who watched the Queen's speech will have seen Prince Charles announce that there's going to be a UK data reform bill.
Sure.
And all the speculation is that it's going to make UK GDPR lighter touch. Now, we don't know quite what the government means by lighter touch, but presumably it means less laborious.
So because of that, if we can then take a step back, so it was an EU directive.
Yes, yeah.
And it was the UK that, because of EU, we were part of the EU,
correct.
So we had to implement that directive.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So what you're saying now, through the Queen's speech, is that Prince Charles announced that there's going to be a lighter touch. What does that mean?
What it means, I think, is that some of the issues in it, which are a bit laborious at the moment, I mean, the GDPR has something called the Article 30 register, which is very technical and is all about data and what you do with it and where you store it and all that jazz. I just see that being simplified, because drawing that up is a burden. It's an overhead to business. So I can see the ICO being instructed to say, basically, no, don't have to have that anymore.
Okay.
Or at least it might be a simplified version of that. I don't see that happening, but I don't see the core parts changing. And the reason is it's simple, because when we had Brexit and when we split away from the EU, and we had UK GDPR, and the two are almost identical. I mean, there's minor technical differences, but on the whole, EU GDPR and UK GDPR are the same. But nonetheless, the EU, I mean, bear in mind, we got declared adequate, so it was ruled that UK GDPR was suitable. Didn't happen until the 29th of December 2020. Okay. And UK GDPR came into force at 11 o'clock in the evening on the 31st of December 2020. So, but then again, the EU has a habit of leaving things to the last minute before, so people shouldn't read too much into that. But when the EU gave that adequacy notice and said UK GDPR was adequate, they also included a little phrase in it which said, if the UK changes GDPR away from EU GDPR and we're no longer satisfied, we can withdraw adequacy at 24 hours notice. Now, if they do that, if that happened, that's like doomsday scenario, but if that happened and they did that, suddenly anyone who's in the UK who's sending data to the EU, or vice versa, would suddenly have to rewrite all their contracts that they were sharing data with.
So in other words, the EU supersedes UK law in that area to do with GDPR. Yeah. And if you don't get your house in order and you think that you're complying with UK law, but you've been marked as an inadequate, you're falling foul of EU law, and that's going to be bad. Yeah, I mean, it would be a disaster, really, for business in the UK. You see, these things are the things that our listeners and readers and viewers are looking out and crying out for, to find this information, because they're asking other business owners and directors, and not only those, but advisors, what's happening in this area. Mm. There aren't enough of you, Keith. No, there aren't. There aren't. That's very true. I mean, there are less than 10 GDPR specialists in the UK, I would say, who are full service GDPR specialists. Wow. Yeah. And some of them are, well, I mean, they're all really good, but
Some specialise in one area. Like someone I know specialises in dentists, and that's all he does.
Okay.
But if a dentist came to me, I wouldn't even try to do the stuff for them. I'd pass them on to Adrian, because he knows all the ins and outs of dentistry.
Sure.
I don't.
No,
I don't want to learn it, so do that. But it is an important area, and I think and part of the problem as well is there is no real recognised standard for a GDPR consultant. There's nothing you can point to and say, hey, I'm a GDPR consultant. Okay. But there are things like, I'm a member of the Institute I'm a member of the International Association of Privacy Professionals.
Okay.
And the International Association of Accessibility Professionals.
So international tells me that's worldwide.
Yeah. And it's quite a high bar to become a member. So that hopefully gives people some reassurance.
Sure.
But if anyone's thinking about employing a GDPR consultant, I would say ask to speak to people they're dealing with at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, do take up the references. Don't just take what somebody says, because frankly, I can look on the internet and find half a dozen people that I know don't have the first idea what's going on, but you'd think they were that they were specialists. Ask to talk to people they've spoken to, because if they're like me, for instance, I'm a consultant for GDPR to 2 FTSE 100 companies. One of those FTSE 100 companies chose me over KPMG to provide their GDPR service. So, I take that as being a real endorsement. But do make sure that who you're talking to knows what they're doing.
Sure.
But also, again, and this is part of the reason that I run the podcast, is not just to educate people, but actually, of course, it means I've got my finger on the pulse, because I'm aware all the time of what is changing. You're
up with the legislation, you're understanding new directives.
And in fact, I have an agreement with, it's a gentleman's agreement, but I have a gentleman's agreement with the ICO, that if they have any major new legislation, they announce it on my podcast first.
Oh, wow.
And so, that is important, but it's recognition, I think, that there's respect both ways.
Sure.
And
you're seen as a trusted person to come to.
And because of that, it means that sometimes I'm told the things that are changing before they change, albeit that, on pain of death to actually let lead to anybody. But I do get consulted on, this is what we're thinking. How do you think business would react to that? Wow. And I can either say, actually, I think that's great, or, it's not worth a hassle. Yeah, but I do want to come back to a key point, which I think is the number of registrations, and this is one thing that frustrates me with the government at the moment. And I've had this discussion with the Right Honourable Damien Hines MP, who is the Security Minister for the UK. That they want to make GDPR simpler in the UK because that attracts the good headlines. That's going to get you, a nice front page splash on the Daily Mail. I actually don't think that's the issue. I think we should be worrying about that 78% of companies who aren't registered at all, and get them registered. Let's concentrate all the effort there before we start trying to change things. Because you know what? UK GDPR is not ideal. It's got little niggles, which I'm sure will infuriate everyone, but it's a damn sight better than nothing. And my personal view is, it's an old adage, but my personal view is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Sure.
And, with that threat from the EU hanging over us, that they could just say, you know what, we're not happy with that anymore.
Inadequate.
And we don't know how long it would then take to restore adequacy, of course, if we got into that situation. With everything else that's happening in the world at the moment, whether that's the cost of living crisis, whether that's Ukraine, whether it's any of these issues,
the last thing
we want to do is bugger about with GDPR, to be honest,
and define huge sums of money, which could put the business at risk.
Well, exactly. Why have the Treasury maybe fine £2 billion, let's say, when you don't need to? Yeah.
Grief.
Yeah. I mean that's a figure I've plucked out. Yeah.
Sure.
But why do that when you don't need to? I don't understand the logic. Yeah, admittedly, I'm not a top tier politician, but they do have a logic. But I don't understand it, and I've stressed to Damien Hines on several occasions when I met him. Don't change it. Yeah, we might want to make little changes to some things that are niggle. But other than that, it's working, And one of the things that I say to people, is about GDPR being a mindset rather than a rule set. And what I would say to anyone watching or listening is when you think about how you're handling data in your organisation, I always say to people, whatever bit of data it is, whether it's on a computer, whether it's on a bit of paper, whether it's scribbled in your diary, whatever.
And to get this right, Keith, this is clients, suppliers, customers, and even potential customers
absolutely.
that you talk to.
Absolutely.
Potential suppliers.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's pretty well anyone. Yeah. I always say to people, when you look at that bit of data and what's happening to it, imagine that was you. That was data about you.
Yes.
Would you be happy with what's happening to it?
Okay.
And if the answer to that hand on heart is no, well then why the hell should anyone else be?
Sure.
And I think that's really important. And the other thing that I always say to people, because one thing I mentioned, I talked about data retention, how long you keep documents, yeah? And as long as you make your decision, you decide as long as you like. You can say we can keep all our data for 100 years, yeah? As long as you can say, we've thought about it, and this is our reason why we're keeping it for 100 years, you can keep it for 100 years, document it, great, no problem. But what I always say to people is, would you be, whatever that reason is that you're keeping that information for that length of time, would you be prepared to say that, whatever that reason is, followed by Your Honour? Because, if you'd be prepared to say it in a court of law, under oath, it's probably a valid reason.
Sure.
If actually, in your mind you're thinking, I'm not sure I'd want to commit to saying that under oath, it's probably not a valid reason.
Sure.
You probably need a bit deeper to find what the valid reason is. Or perhaps there isn't a valid reason, and it shouldn't be 100 years, it should be 10 years.
Maybe so.
And so it's that way of thinking. And I mean, again, blow my own trumpet for a moment, one of the things that all of my clients say to me, and I hope it's coming over in this interview, is that I'm the first person they've ever met who makes GDPR enjoyable.
Really?
And I take that as a big,
big positive.
As a big tagline. I'll take that.
Sure.
Thanks. But I think it should be enjoyable because you know what? If you sit in a training session and you enjoy it, and I mean my training sessions have laughs in them. Yeah, who thinks a training session on GDPR would have laughs in them? But it does. If you have a training session and you enjoy it, you remember it.
Yeah, of course you do.
If you have a training session and it's boring, and you sit there, and after an hour you're thinking, all the things I could be at my desk doing,
sure.
rather than sitting here listening to this prat wandering on about GDPR. You ain't going to remember it.
No.
And so, it's a lesson I learned a long time ago that make it fun,
Yep.
yeah? And because I think, again, it's one, this is going back in my personal history, but 8 years ago, I had a major bleed on my brain.
Wow.
Which left me unable to do anything apart from speak and eat. That was it, basically. Everything else I couldn't do. Yeah. What that did do, though, and I mean, thank God that I've recovered well from that. But what I did do is it made me rethink life about what was important and what isn't. Yeah. And I'd freely admit that before that, looking back now, I'd freely admit I was a workaholic. Yeah. I lived to work. Yeah. Now I work to live.
Okay.
And that's a fundamental difference, yeah. Because, I would say to everyone listening, I don't suppose any of us, if we're honest, are going to lay on our deathbed and say, do you know what, I really wish I'd spent more time in the office. It doesn't happen, yeah. And what I say to people as well is, because it's a phrase above from someone else, but it's very, very adequate, I think, very appropriate. Any situation you hit in your life, business life or personal life, this will pass because it does. Nothing is forever.
Sure.
And secondly, what does this make possible? What can you do now that you couldn't do then? And I mean, COVID's made us all think of that. For God's sake, in March 2020, when suddenly we were all told you can't go to the office anymore. No. Suddenly we had to think. I mean, I went from a £150,000 a year company to a £32,000 a year company overnight. Yeah, and because suddenly all this training, all this consultancy we were going out to do, we were going to London, we were going to Birmingham, going wherever, couldn't do anymore.
Couldn't do it.
And we didn't know Zoom then. It was like, what the hell's that? Yeah, but now suddenly that's turned around. Yeah, now if you say to someone, let's have a meeting on Zoom, most people, or Teams or whatever your flavour is, most people are absolutely fine with that. Yeah, and that's why I think, again, I think it's wrong, this move to get people back in the office, because my personal feel is that if all we do is go back to the old norm, the last 3 years have been for nothing. You know, I think we should all take advantage of the fact now that people can work from home. Yeah, people, you know, not everybody can, and I appreciate that. You know, there's a whole difference between if you're relatively, I guess, older, you've got a property, you've got a nice study, you can sit in your house and you can work nicely, you've got a nice garden, you can sit in your house and work nicely. Working from home is great. I do appreciate that if you're one of 6 people sharing a flat and your desk, because of that, is an ironing board, then that ain't so great.
Sure.
And you want to go back in the office.
But my guess is that actually the implications of GDPR from people working from home now have just absolutely ramped up.
Absolutely.
Beyond recognition.
Absolutely, yeah, because people forget. Yeah, suddenly they're not in the office anymore, they're working at home. So they've got something on their screen about Mrs. Jones, and they just wander away from their screen to make coffee, forgetting that their friend is there, who actually now can see everything there is to see about Mrs. Jones. Now, they may or may not do anything with that information. It really doesn't matter, but they shouldn't be seeing it in the first place.
The law.
Yeah, there's actually a data breach, yeah? Do they record that data breach? Probably not, yeah? And so one of the things which I'm very keen on stressing on companies as well is if you are now going to a hybrid model of working, which lots of companies are.
So sometimes in the office and sometimes at
home. Yeah.
Bit of both.
Then carry out a data protection impact assessment. Yeah, look to see where the risks to data are, because actually my personal belief is that people who work half in the office and half at home are a bigger risk than people who work at home all the time.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, it's all too easy that maybe you've downloaded some data from your main database into a spreadsheet, and you think, you know what, I'm working at home tomorrow, I'll take that home on my laptop and I'll carry on working at it. Suddenly, that's a whole set of data which no one except you knows exists.
Sure.
Yeah. And there's no control over it. It's out there in the wilderness. And suddenly you've got a big GDPR problem. Yeah, because what if that person then, halfway home, they stop off at Tesco's to get a pint of milk, and someone nicks their laptop out of the car? Yeah, you suddenly got a big problem. And all the time they were working at home, that didn't matter because they didn't take their laptop to bloody Tesco's with them. Yes. But now they are. Sure. Yeah, and so there's all these extra risks that people need to think about, because at the end of the day, if you have a problem and you have a data breach, then it's you as the company owner, or it's you as the directors of the company who got that issue. It isn't poor old Joe who had his laptop stolen.
No, it's the company.
It's you.
Yeah.
And you know, you're then faced with, you know, you don't want the headline on your local paper to be, you know, if you're particularly a well-known company in your area, so-and-so's, you know, suddenly all their customer data is out in the big wide world, out in the big wide world somewhere, because, you know, somebody had their laptop stolen. Yeah. Sure. And so it's all these things to think about, and it's trying to get that over to people. And also because one of the other things, of course, is that GDPR for any organisation with sort of more than 250 people should be having refresher training every year. Sure. Yeah. And of course that hasn't happened for the last 2 years. No. It just hasn't happened. So suddenly you've got people who are rusty anyway, because they just haven't had that top up. And even if they do remember, what they're remembering now is out of date. Sure. Anyway. And so, you know, again, I would say to companies of any reasonable size, if you haven't got it booked in to do refresher training, and, you know, yes, of course, I hope you use me, but I actually don't care if you don't use me. Sure. You use somebody.
Just make sure you do it.
Make sure you do it, yeah.
You mentioned to me before we started talking on the podcast, you mentioned about Google Analytics. Can I ask you what it is? Because I'm...
Yes, sure. I mean, yeah, most of us use Google Analytics on our websites, yeah. The issue is that Google Analytics collects from the person who's viewing your website their IP address, so, you know, the address of their machine. And that is now regarded as being personally identifiable information. It never used to be, but it is.
So that's now just come in as a directive from the government or from the EU?
That's come in as a directive from the EU.
Good grief.
That IP addresses are now data, you know, now personally identifiable data. That IP address gets passed back by Google to a server in California. the issue is that server in California, because the US actually, people think of the US being ahead of us, but actually they're far behind us on GDPR and privacy issues. The US government can just go in and look at that server and just see who's been on and who hasn't. And so the knee-jerk reaction from the EU was to say, stop people using Google Analytics. Yeah, that was
stop people using Google Analytics. Full stop.
That was the first draft that came out from them. Yeah, myself and I'm sure most other people in the industry pushed back hard at that and said, we can't go to our clients and say, do not use Google Analytics anymore.
Of course not.
It ain't going to work.
No.
Yeah, because I know there are alternatives, but for most people there are no alternatives to doing it. And so what was agreed now is that if you use Google Analytics, then you must include a line in your privacy policy on your website that says, our website uses Google Analytics. So that users who come to your website are aware that you use Google Analytics, and therefore they know there might be a risk.
As an estimation, Keith, how many people out of every 100 people know that exists? One?
Less than one.
Less than one,
probably. And again, it's one to bite you on the bottom.
It's a breach of the law.
And the other one, whilst we're talking about Google as well, is Google Fonts, right? Because Google Fonts, again, lots of people use Google Fonts on their website via something called the Google Fonts API, which if people are listening to a web developer, then they know what that is. If it's not, then talk to your web developer, they know what it is. I'm not going to try and explain in a 30-minute podcast what that is.
Sure.
But if they use the Google Fonts API, again, that's now in breach of GDPR, because again, it's passing information back to Google.
It's classed as personal data.
So you have to download the Google font, or your web developer does, serve it from your web server, and then it's all fine. So it's not you can't use that font anymore, it's just the way you use it has to change. The ICO has latched onto this, I think it's fair to say, as a money maker, because what they've said is, we can automatically crawl a website to see whether it's using the Google Fonts API or not. We don't have to do anything. We can, we
do that automatically.
We have an automatic process to do that. If we find that you are, we'll write to you and tell you that you're using Google Fonts API and that's a breach. Yeah, you shouldn't be doing that anymore. But because we can check it automatically, we're going to fine you £100 every day until you stop using it.
Every day?
Every day until you stop using it. Now, £100 a day, I had this conversation with one of my clients, and he said, well, £100 a day, that's nothing, is it? And I said, well, it isn't. Okay, I mean, it's to me, it's to you probably, but to them, a big company, £100 a day is probably neither here nor there. But I said, £100 a day is £3,000 a month, £36,000 a year. Yeah, that's a person. Mm-hmm. Yeah, So are you happy then that you're paying the ICO for a person, effectively, solely because you're using the font wrongly on your website?
Could be two, could be three people.
Yeah, just doesn't make sense.
No.
Yeah. So if you're using it, do, again, people listening and watching, do talk to your web developer, say, are we using Google Fonts API? If the answer is yes, then tell them, don't do that anymore. Download the fonts, store them on our web server, problem goes away. Yeah, it's a simple fix. And, if I do one thing today that hopefully helps people, then that's that.
So Keith, we've come to the end of the podcast, and that for me was like 5 minutes, because I'm a business owner and it was absolutely fascinating. I'm certainly going to be booking in to have a conversation with you offline to talk about my business. And what I'd like to say to the listeners and viewers out there, that there's a whole host of things that are packed in that talk. Thank you so much for bringing it to our attention. Thanks for coming in and speaking to us today. And from the British Business Podcast, thank you. And to our viewers and listeners, until next time.